Okay, I'd like to call February 21st Tuolumne County Planning Commission to order. We'll start with the pledge. Please join me. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So before we get started, there was yesterday at the Board of Supervisors, there were some changes. We do have an updated document with some of those changes. If you would like them, they're on the back table. If we do need some more, let us know and we can get some more printed. Also today, according to the Brown Act, when we do have the opportunity to talk about for or against or neutrally, you do not have to introduce yourself, but you can. You can address the board. There's additional agendas according to the Brown Act. And finally, we are going to, since there's enough crowd, we're going to have a 3-minute time limit. And that'll start when you start talking, and we will all be able to see when that is over. So first, to get started, is there any reports from commissioners? Commissioners?
None.
No? Staff, any reports? David, no?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. How about a report from the Board of Supervisors Planning Committee Representative? Thank you. A report from the Agricultural Advisory Committee Representative?
No report.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to the minutes of the meeting on February 7th, 2017.
I move approval.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
I have to abstain.
Charlotte has to abstain, and I will also abstain as I was not there.
I abstain.
And Dick will abstain as well. And with that, we will close the Planning Commission business and move on to public comment. Public comment is any comments you have without the agenda items. So you can't talk about anything on today's agenda, but if you have any public comments, now's the time. And we have 15 minutes for that. Is there any public comment?
Good evening. I see there's 7 members. This is my first time here. I live in Calaveras County.
Okay.
Most of the counties have 5 members on the Planning Commission. I worked for land use planning in Calaveras County for 10 years. I was the deputy director. But my question is, who are the other 2 people and what do they do if they don't represent districts?
They're the at-large members.
Oh.
So we have 2 members that are at-large.
And how are they picked?
Still by supervisors, correct? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I read in today's newspaper with interest what transpired yesterday with the Board of Supervisors.
It's about our agenda item. I apologize.
Pardon me?
It's about the agenda item, so I apologize. That'll be, you can bring it back up in your
Okay.
comments on the agenda. Thank you. Okay, with that, I will do a last call, and I will close the public comment portion of today's meeting. And we move on to our agenda item, and we will start with staff reports.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, my name is David Gonzalez. I'm your Community Resource Agency Director, and I want to acknowledge the paper that we handed out for the update that occurred yesterday as late as 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Staff literally just finished that, so we have provided copies to the public as well as yourself, and if you want to take a moment to review that, that would be fine. I will tell you there are some changes which we can highlight. There were changes to the areas where they moved some of the zoning districts up, and if you would think about this in the smaller parcels, that they moved some of the RE1, RE2, RE3, RE5, and RE10 up into the same bracket. There were some additions to a plant count in the larger parcels, A10 and AE37. There were some changes, and we'll be discussing some of those items as we go through regarding the use of what we call greenhouses, and Daniel will cover those. Those are the high-level discussion points. And again, we do apologize for giving you this at such a late notice, but we literally just finished it. So, Mr. Chairman, it is your choice whether you want to allow some time to look at that, but we can go through our presentation whenever you're ready.
Commissioners, do you want a little more time to read over?
No, we're
Ready to go
We'll
forward?
follow along
Okay.
with David.
Okay. So I'm going to take another moment to embarrass one of my staff members, and because I can. Daniel Van Essens, our planner, who's been working on this project since it really got started and off the ground. He has accepted another position in Sacramento, and he'll be leaving my planning department. So I am very happy for him, as I've told him, but not happy at all with him. So tonight, after you're done, if you want to take a moment, this is probably the last time you will, unfortunately, see one of our best and brightest. So I wanted to say that before he started his presentation. And again, personally, publicly thank him for all his hard work on this item. It's been taxing at best. So if you're ready to move forward, I'm going to turn it over to our very capable planner.
Thank you. Thank you,
All right.
David. Thank you, Daniel.
Yep.
Thanks, David. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. We appreciate all the input you could put into this. So today we're going to be going over the Cannabis Personal Use Ordinance. My name's Dan Van Essen. I'm a planner for Tuolumne County and work for the Community Resources Agency. To get into some background, on February 2nd, 2016, the Board of Supervisors adopted regulations for personal medical cannabis cultivation, and the regulations allowed for a qualified patient or primary caregiver residing on a parcel to cultivate up to 12 plants outdoors and 24 plants indoors. And if 2 or more qualified patients or primary caregivers resided on a parcel, they were able to cultivate up to 24 plants outdoors. So on November 14th, 2017, the Board of Supervisors directed county staff to draft an ordinance reducing plant allowances and implementing reasonable regulations to address odor, safety, security, visibility, enforcement, the environment, and quality of life. And we met with the board yesterday, and they adopted an urgency ordinance, which we'll have in place for a short period. And I'll get a little more into that further on in the presentation. What's on the current or proposed ordinance that we have there, this is, like David was saying, this has changed some. I'm going to get into the different changes the board discussed. They didn't necessarily direct. It was more of a discussion. And so, but just to go over the direction on November 14th, it was pretty much to, so for R1, R2, R3, which is pretty much our smaller residential lots, single-family residential, lots within subdivisions, different apartment complexes, duplexes, and then all of our commercial zonings, industrial zonings, K, which is for recreation, and TPZ for Timberland Preserve. The original direction was to not allow any outdoor cultivation and to allow 6 plants for indoor cultivation per state law. Moving on to RE1, RE2, RE3, the direction was to allow up to 6 outdoor plants per parcel and the 6 indoor per state law. And the RE5, RE10, the A10, A20, and AE37 for 6 plants outdoors. Pretty much the same thing, but with a total cultivation area of 1,000 square feet and a total setback of 100 feet. So we proposed certain regulations to help mitigate odor, visibility, all those different concerns we had. And included within that were making sure that the cannabis wouldn't be visible from any adjacent public right-of-way or public place. The elimination of generator use except for emergency backup. The elimination of use of gas products for cannabis cultivation and processing. Ensuring that all cannabis cultivation was on a parcel with a legal dwelling unit and a permanent resident on that parcel, and that every parcel had landlord permission. There's nothing within our ordinance or state law that prohibits a landlord from denying that permission. and that the cannabis cultivation apply with all applicable codes and applicable regulations. So this was for all the indoor and outdoor regulations. Moving on to strictly indoor regulations. We wanted to ensure that all filtration and ventilation systems were designed to and installed to prevent accumulation of humidity and mold, and that indoor cultivation would occur in such a manner to minimize the cannabis plant odors from exiting the interior of structures, including odor control, filtration and ventilation systems, shielding of all light systems, maintaining dwelling unit features such as a bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, and maintaining a 12 inches from the ceiling for or any lighting for fire reasons. Moving on to strictly outdoor regulations, requiring opaque fencing at least 6 feet in height with a lockable gate for both security and visibility reasons. Maintaining the cultivation within one contiguous area, which was defined in our chart that we showed, and maintaining a sensitive use setback of 1,000 feet. And this would be from any school evacuation site, federal land, all the different sensitive uses that are defined within the ordinance. For the upcoming schedule, as I said, the board yesterday approved the urgency ordinance, which will remain in effect until April 6th, 2018. After that, they can extend it up to 22 months and 15 days with another public hearing. And today we're bringing forth the ordinance for your review, your suggestions, what you'd like to see on there, and we'll be bringing it back to the board on March 6th. And along with that, we'll be bringing an enforcement strategy. In terms of the board discussion yesterday, like David mentioned, they discussed moving the RE5 and RE10 zonings up into the, with all the other REs, with all the other REs here, and maintaining one separate distinction for all agricultural, in which they wanted to increase up to 12 outdoor plants. So there's also discussion on greenhouses and the discussion of allowing some greenhouses to be defined as indoor cultivation. And basically, we had a discussion with staff today on that, and we were looking at the possibility of having accessory structures that meet the definition of indoor, could in fact be utilized for indoor cultivation. And with that, standard zoning setbacks and building permit requirements would apply for all those accessory structures. And in addition to that, they would be subject to all the indoor regulations, obviously, but we'd also like to include that they also have a lockable gate and with the greenhouse or accessory structure, whatever it is, and that they maintain the sensitive use setback for 1,000 feet from any school, whatever is defined within that sensitive use. So looking at some greenhouses, we wanted to define this clearly just so we could draw a line here. These would not be considered acceptable greenhouses. Obviously, you could break into them easily. They're not lockable. Some of them don't have doors here. They wouldn't be acceptable. What we would be looking at is something like this, where you have a lockable door, secure materials that are difficult to break into, and a permanent foundation. I'll allow David or Doug to get into that more in specific if you'd like to. But that's really what we're looking at here. And the board wanted to have those in, or the board discussed having those in every zoning district. So one thing we decided to take out from what we had in the original memo, or we'd like to take out, we'd like to hear what you guys have to say about it, was we originally put in some allowance for an accessory structure to be built in which if there's multiple houses on a parcel, that they could grow up to 12 plants total. And the reasoning behind this was really to prevent multiple accessory structures on a property for multiple residents of that property. We just thought it'd be a little complex, but after yesterday, we realized that might just complicate things and maybe possibly create some loopholes. And so that's something we suggest taking out of the ordinance completely. Something the board discussed a little bit, and we'd like your recommendation on, was the current regulations that are set forth in our medical cannabis ordinance for the cultivation of, the cultivation must be within 50 contiguous square feet. We'd like your direction if you'd like to keep that. And if you do keep that, we'd recommend that we would remove the square footage limitation for any accessory structure, because the board stated yesterday that they would like to push most of the cultivation within these greenhouses. So another item that we need to discuss moving forth is the sensitive uses and non-compliant or non-conforming uses. Currently, for non-conforming uses in our ordinance throughout zoning, we allow non-conforming use to continue if it was going on before that ordinance was written. We have an issue here looking at the possibility of someone cultivating outside and following all the different regulations that are set place on them, and then their next door neighbor may be opening up a church, and they would be non-compliant. So we're looking at looking for your direction on if you'd like to treat that as a non-conforming use, and have the cultivation, allow the cultivation to continue unless there is a break for 18 months, or if you'd like to have a 90-day period, or other reasonable time frame in which they could bring that into compliance, or if you'd like to just treat it as a violation. Mm-hmm.
So I want to make something very clear about this. So the way the ordinance is written, as far as a grow in referencing to the higher plant counts previously allowed, those are not non-conforming uses. Those are not to be allowed. They can't continue. 6 plants will be the maximum, or 12 if that's what's passed. So somebody that is growing, or say that they were continuing to grow, that will not be allowed. That is a non-compliant use. It is not non-conforming. So I want to make sure you understand that, so you don't confuse the cultivation of the higher plant counts. That reduction is mandatory. That is not an issue that's being non-conforming. So I just want to make that
Peter?
clear.
So in essence, what you're saying, they were legal under the old rules, but not legal growing that many today?
That's correct.
Because of the change?
The change in the ordinance is
making sure.
deliberate. That plant count will not be a non-conforming use.
He does that double negative again.
Not.
Yeah, the not.
So for our recommendation, it's recommended that your planning commission conduct a public hearing for the proposed ordinance, which we're obviously doing today. And it's further recommended that your planning commission recommend approval of the proposed ordinance with your, suggestions, modifications, and consistent to the following findings, A through C listed there. So if you have any questions, please let me know. I know you're probably going to want to go into each of those in depth, so we could bring those slides back up.
I'll start us out real quick. Can you go back to the slide where you're talking about the change in, for parcels with multiple dwelling units? So to get myself right, we're essentially saying you can't do indoor and greenhouses. Essentially, we're trying to prevent the fact that you would have 6 plants in a greenhouse, 6 plants inside of a house, especially on the smaller, like R1, R2 zones.
That wasn't really the purpose. It was more, originally it was so they could grow those 12 plants within one area if you have multiple people growing
Okay.
with multiple houses on a parcel. That We just decided to take that out because it was too confusing. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Talking about this part of the plants, I was confused if we were talking about the fact that we don't want a loophole or some sort of way that someone could have a greenhouse and a house grow on like an R1 or R2 zone. I was trying to get a better explanation of
Okay,
kind of what's going on.
as you know, we had probably just a few hours to kind of talk through these things. And so as you're sitting there discussing things and trying to make sure, our job is to, and yours is to make a recommendation to the board, is to pass an ordinance as enforceable.
Okay.
And so from an enforcement standpoint, we had some discussions with our code enforcement team, myself, our legal department on this matter, and there was discussions both ways. And we want you to make sure you consider it and talk about it and make your recommendation on it. This is what we had currently suggested. Previously, the discussion and thought was if you had multiple dwellings and you wanted to allow an outside use, which was considered indoors, the greenhouse wasn't in
Right.
play here, okay?
Yeah.
The thought was to consolidate them, okay? With the caveat coming in with greenhouses, that throws it a little bit into play. So to avoid confusion on that matter, if we just take that out, if somebody wants to build an accessory structure, so be it, they can do that.
Okay.
If they want to try to comply with indoor requirements and have a structure outside that's basically a garage, just use that as an example, that they want to call indoor use, they'd be allowed to grow their 6 plants there.
Okay.
Previously, they would have been allowed, if they had 2 dwellings, to put 12 in there. Does that help you?
Yeah.
Okay,
That clears it up a little bit.
okay.
Thank you.
This is not a simple subject. And we struggle, we had hours to try to come up with this, so this is our best point. We're going to have a little more time to discuss about it when we get to the board. But this is something we want you guys to consider and give us your recommendations so we can forward it to the board as well.
Dick, you had some questions?
Yeah, for apartment houses, I'm still not clear. Can each person have their own outdoor greenhouse?
So go back to the slide with the tables on it. So multifamily, yeah, that'll work. So multifamily would be in your R2, R3 type of environment. And they're allowed to grow inside. If they're landowner, if you're
Okay.
an apartment that's rented, the landowner would have to approve that. But in essence, the board is wanting to allow a greenhouse effect, but it has to have setbacks, meet the setbacks, which will be plugged into that, which will likely be, similar to the RE1, RE2, RE3, 100-foot with a setback. Most of those complexes will not have that possibility.
Right.
Because they're very location of them and the parcel makeup how apartment complexes are built, that will be highly unlikely. But if they meet those setbacks, they would be allowed. So what you're saying in question is, can they all have individual ones?
Sure.
I guess in essence, it's something we need to consider, but technically, yes. But I don't think it's physically possible, Commissioner, for them to actually do that. Because if you think about a complex where it's built, how it's structured, the land, the setbacks, there's really not that space. There's no fences usually. You can't control the odor. You don't have a secure area. It's not yours to secure. And so I don't think we're going to have this issue. But as we go through this, as I told staff, we're going to have challenges as we go through this. And we're going to go back. We might have to make some adjustments to it. But we didn't talk about that. But as I'm thinking through, as I'm talking to you, I don't foresee that as being a big problem.
Okay.
But on the surface, your approach is correct. Under that, they would have that ability if they met all the other mitigations,
Yeah.
which is where their challenge would be, and it'd be highly improbable. Did you have something? And he was just telling me about a conversation I wasn't privy to. And it was regarding setbacks of greenhouses into the property lines, being secure and that type of thing. So my answer wouldn't really change you, but there are a lot of caveats to this that wouldn't be involved. But
Yeah, I had one more.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. What was the board's thinking of going to 12 from 6, given that this is supposed to be non-commercial and all that sort of thing? What's the thinking behind that 12?
So anything beyond 6 requires, 7th plant and above, requires a medical, I think the term is recommendation, is that? Recommendation. Yes, medical
what it says.
recommendation card.
Yeah.
So regardless of what we allowed, they'd have to have that, but I've been told they're pretty readily available. So the board's thinking, the board's thinking on that, as the 4 of them were discussing it just yesterday, was because of the physical size of those parcels, the discussions and questions that were asked of me of code enforcement was, were we getting the complaints there? And back to their original intent was why they had the higher plant count previous was regarding the medical availability of how much a person needs.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not certain where that's going to land. I'll be real straightforward with you because the board as a whole has to vote on that. But that was the discussion points, and they were generally not where there was large complaints. They had the area to get those setbacks, and the fact that they wouldn't have problems with those, they were willing to maybe allow a higher plant count in those areas and those areas only. Did I answer your question?
Well, if I could follow up. We're apparently assuming that 6 is enough for an individual, because we have 6 in all these other cases.
For recreational use.
Well, for whatever use, 6 is some standard, right or wrong, but that's what it says. And we had 6 down there, now we've doubled that.
That's correct.
Aren't we all of a sudden talking about selling it and all that kind of thing?
Obviously, that's not legal.
Yeah.
And there was a point of that discussion briefly. So again, people can get medical recommendations for a lot of different things. Whether we agree with those or not, the board has to contemplate where they want to land on that. What is enough? You're asking the wrong gentleman.
Okay.
I apologize.
Yeah, a couple of things. First off, just a point of clarification, maybe based on the year of hanging around with this in the working group. One of the issues with that a number of us felt somewhat uncomfortable with when the recommendation, when all of this was coming around in the joint committee, was that we were becoming significantly, the person that was legitimately using taking advantage of the Medical Marijuana Act end up having a much more restrictive environment now than they did before all of this was in place. And there was a fairly compelling argument from an awful lot of people in there that in fact there was a bunch of reasons why they, at any given point in time, they don't necessarily need 12 plants all the time, but the argument's made that they may not be terrific farmers, so a lot of these plants may die while they're off taking care of some of their medical issues, that the ebb and flow. There's a whole bunch of arguments about why the medical marijuana environment is different. Now, we all know medical marijuana gets abused, right? But the argument would be that it isn't fair to limit those that are doing this correctly just to be able to capture the people that are abusing that, right? So that was where that drove, regardless of where you fit on it. I think that's kind of how we got to that point.
Good recollection, Commissioner, as well as how they use that plant. My understanding is they can take extracts out of it, they can pull the oils out of them, that type of thing. So there's that discussion as well, not yesterday, but previous, as Commissioner Baker had mentioned.
I mean, even with this, the thing that is certainly going to be the case is that those that were using medical marijuana for legitimate medical marijuana will be in a much more restrictive environment than they were a year ago. Right? That's a fact of what's happened with this all regulation. Whether it was intended consequences or unintended consequences is sort of a moot point at this point. But that's and so that I think had an awful lot to do with that number number being adjusted. I had a couple of other questions. If we move on that. One is that when we talk in I think it was 7B or something, you refer to, I think it was 7B, one of these things, that we refer to the fact that an indoor facility is one that's got bathrooms and bedrooms and all of that kind of stuff, right? And then the second question, well, how do you do with the external buildings? Well, these external buildings, by definition, are not going to be, nobody's living in that greenhouse. So those two laws, those two regulations felt like they were they can't both exist at the same point in time, right?
We're struggling to come up with good definitions, as well as I guess the third category is how we're going to caveat this greenhouse, and we will likely use a different term, is why we kind of pushed over from the building code standpoint. Both Doug and I are very comfortable with terms from the building code, accessory, membrane structures, that type of thing. And where we fall into a normal process for us is how we define things in the building code. And so that's where we're pushing towards this. We just wanted to make sure you guys had a good discussion about it. Yes, there's a struggle. Indoor, if you're going to try to, in R1, have your indoor allocation of 6 plants in a structure that is outside the main living area that meets all the requirements for indoors is a tough thing to try to write correctly and make sure we're accurate. But that was the intent, to try to allow people that may be in an apartment complex that have an exterior structure that could do that. Right. And that's a real struggle to try to get that language correct. But
well, I mean, this regulation is going to end up being a mess of compromises, right? Yes. That's just the nature of the beast. So I say this with that in place, but a lot of the things that were for many of us were attractive about indoor, being that out of sight, out of mind, nobody's going to complain what they don't know what goes on in behind closed doors, but become a little less attractive in the greenhouse environment. On the other hand, a lot of the things were very negative were things like code compliance and all the power that gets consumed and having to put in big blanks of lights and all those kind of things. That goes on the opposite side of this equation. So it's definitely a balanced equation. But I think the one thing that I feel like we'd have to have inside of this is that the security of an indoor facility is by definition easier than the security of an outdoor facility. And the process of creating a greenhouse, I mean, by definition, it's going to be less secure. It's a glass house, right? And anybody with a stone can solve this problem. But the fact is that I think on balance, there's a lot of goodness involved in it. But we really have to work the security side of it. There's a difference between a lockable gate and a locked gate, right? Right now, if you put a swimming pool in your backyard, the gate's locked by code, right? The gate swings shut and it locks when you walk away. What we're requiring is that it has the ability to be locked, but not necessarily the requirement for it to be locked, right? It seems like you ought to be at least as restrictive as a swimming pool in this process.
Commissioner Baker, I just wanted to go back to your question regarding the mitigation we placed for indoor cultivation within a dwelling. So it states when cultivation occurs within a dwelling unit, it shall maintain the functional bedroom, kitchen. So that's the key there with the dwelling unit.
Okay.
And obviously within a greenhouse would be considered an accessory unit.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Peter?
Well, just hearkening back to our prior discussion several months back regarding medical marijuana, and I know this commission struggled with whether there was a certain number of plants that we thought was okay. We made considerable debate and ended up at 12 after hearing from the medical folks who convinced me at least that 12 was a number that they thought was the right number. So it is restrictive, as Jerry says, coming back to 6. To some degree, I have a problem with that because they were quite compelling in terms of why they thought 12 was there, and they've made a very good presentation, I thought. So I'm struggling with that a little bit. Don't know where that's going to go, but just thought I'd throw that thought out there.
I wanted to be clear, if you happen to live in a really big house and a really big lot, you can have 12 plants total, or is it 18, 6 inside and 12 outside?
It's either or.
Yeah, it's either or.
It's either or, it's not
Okay.
additive.
All right. So, again, if you happen, if you happen to have the money to live in a great big establishment or a big lot, you can have 12 plants outside.
Yeah, if this was adopted, yes.
If you have a marijuana card.
And a
Yeah,
medical
you still- yeah.
recommendation. Yeah.
Guido at the corner will give you that. That's no problem.
Charlotte, any questions? No. Heidi, any questions? Okay, any more questions?
I did feel the conflict that Jerry pointed out earlier, the dwelling, indoor, outdoor business.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a couple of nitty-gritty, detailed questions. I don't know whether to drag the process down now or if we should let it go a little further, because it's, how we measure some stuff and things. Why don't we hold off on that?
Okay,
I'm
we'll
sure
do
I'll
that in
give it a
the
shot.
final.
Get into the detail later.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I think so.
So,
Okay. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, we are happy to go through each of these individually, if you would like. But really, we've highlighted most of those now about the challenges about, I'm going to call them accessory structures or greenhouses. We've talked about the plant count changes in the chart. Obviously, the reduction from the original adopted ordinance is a big swing in that. The discussions about the indoor cultivation areas and the limitations on the size, that 50 square feet came from the original ordinance. And so you may want to discuss that. I am trying to make sure you guys have a good understanding of what we are going to be presenting to the board, because your recommendation should be fully vetted and you should have all the information. That's why we're here tonight. Although it was rushed, we do want to make sure you have all the information at the time to consider that, as well as the public comment before making your recommendation. So I think we've covered most of those items.
David, so essentially you're saying there are about, I think I saw 3 items that we need to collectively decide on too before we even made a recommendation of approval. Because if we did a recommendation of approval without any of
That's
those.
correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
I want to make sure we highlighted the change, because you were handed something there in a minute. And
Right.
now that we've gone over, it seems like you have a good understanding of those. Are the questions are indicating that clearly to us. And so I just wanted to state that, and then I'll give it back to you, Chair.
Peter, you had a question?
You said that the 50 square feet came from the original ordinance?
That's correct.
The medical marijuana area.
Yeah, right.
That's correct.
So, I mean, you're roughly talking a little smaller than the average bedroom, probably.
Half of a bedroom.
Yeah.
So do we really care whether it's half of a bedroom or a whole bedroom? I'm wondering why 50. And I'm looking at Doug, who's going to have to enforce this.
Well, we talked about this. So I just brought it up because I wanted you to have that
Well, no,
conversation.
I'm glad you did, because I had forgotten about that. I did write it down.
It's an indoor use. It's 5 feet.
By 10.
Well, I'm 6 foot tall. Dan's a lot taller than that. But, this table's about 7 foot by 5 foot. So you think about a 10 by 5 area is what it would be.
Got it.
Standard bedrooms, 10 by 10,
So
roughly.
about half a bedroom.
So that's what it is. So
I'm just wondering if it matters, whether it's half a bedroom or a whole bedroom. If you got a bedroom you're not using, I don't know.
the fact you're discussing is exactly what we want.
Yeah, I don't see a huge difference, but whoever has to enforce this, they're going to have to measure it. My thought was one room, but, that's just a different way to do it.
I think the
but-
problem then is one room is different than one other
True,
room.
you could have a room that's 20 by 20, I get it. So I don't know.
Daniel, you had
I don't
something?
know.
I think the main difference there is these plants can be grown in so many different sizes and shapes. We saw plants that were 15, 20 feet tall and very wide. And so it's going to make a difference on, I guess, the overall yield you can get from that. So I think that's where it comes in. And just for some clarification, that's just for indoor cultivation.
No, I understood that.
Yeah.
Jerry, you have one last thing? Or is
No,
that it?
no, actually, but that was where I was heading for. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So with that, everyone okay for public comment now? Okay, so now we'll move on to public comment. A couple rules of order. We're going to do a 3-minute time limit. That's for every speaker. We'll go through those who want to talk in favor first. Then we'll go to those who want to talk in opposition. After that, we'll do neutral, those who want to speak with either not a favor or an opposition. We do have the ability to go on to rebuttals, answer rebuttals, and I can explain those if we get to that point. Other rules of order, make sure that when you do come up and you're talking in favor and opposition, we stick to point of order, which is essentially we're talking about this ordinance and what are the things we're talking about within this ordinance. So all the other kind of issues we're not really completely discussing yet. And with that.
Cole, can I weigh in?
Sure. Jerry.
Having sat through more than a few marijuana, it's really easy to dive into the commercial side of things.
Exactly.
We are not talking about commercial today. So we hold it, right? Yeah, I know that it's hard. A lot of people have very strong opinions about what we should or shouldn't be doing on commercial, but we're going to be here all night if we get down that path.
So this is personal use.
Yes.
Medical and non-medical. I appreciate you saying that. I've sat through every one of them and some, and then some. And it would also help that they stay on point. And as a suggestion, in the matter of interest of everybody's time, if folks are going to repeat something, just say they agree with the previous speakers. That
Yes,
will
please.
help. It'll also keep people's attention. And I'm assuming yours as well, who they want you to listen. So staying on point is critical to get a message across. We had a little bit of that yesterday. And all it does is distract. I've been very proud of our community up to this point. I want to keep it that way. We have been very civil, very professional, and we have agreed to disagree and not been disagreeable about it. And that's important to continue that. And I'm saying that to both these ends of the public here because I'm very proud of that. That has not been the case in every jurisdiction. And I will do my best to make sure that stays that way here. So I will assist you in any way you ask.
Thank you, David. Yeah.
When we talk about in favor and opposed, most of the time that's really easy to determine. This time you have the original ordinance, and then you have the proposed changes. So I guess they have to define a little bit which one they're talking about for us to know they're in favor of. That's just more for you folks, because otherwise we may get confused between the existing ordinance and the proposed.
Had one other thought, and we'll move on to it because I'm blanking on what I was thinking about. So we'll just go right into it. We're going to start with those who want to speak in favor. In favor of let's go with in favor of the new ordinance packet that we got. How about that? We'll start there. Yeah, we'll go with in favor of the proposed changes. Those in favor.
Oh, dear.
Uh-oh.
Nobody? All right.
Oh.
Oh, yeah, that's a reminder. You do not have to introduce yourself according to the Brown Act. You're more than welcome to. You are addressing the commission. So if you do have questions for staff, please ask us, and then we will make sure to relay questions. Additionally, we are allowed to ask questions of the speaker, but once your 3 minutes is up, your 3 minutes is up.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Bill Boyd, Sonora. I want to thank you guys for the work you've put in and will continue to put in. And I don't have a lot of comments other than I just wanted to speak in favor of the more lenient ordinance. As Jerry said, it's a compromise on top of compromise, and it's not a big win for either side, but I think we're doing a reasonable job satisfying what can be satisfied.
Cool.
Any questions?
Thank you. Appreciate it. Any more who would like to speak in favor?
I'm very impressed with this proposed ordinance. It's obviously your county council.
Thank you.
I can't help, I'm short. So, anyway, obviously, the county council for Tuolumne County has done a really thorough job, in my humble opinion. And I like the setup by the zones and everything. I must tell you, I'm retired law enforcement. Never smoked a joint in my life, but I support this because I think it's something that's reasonable. And in the county I live in, they're in la-la land. And I don't mean that disrespectfully, they just don't have a clue. And that's the reason why 2 of them are in the process of being recalled. And so that they just don't. So other than that, I just want to compliment the county on the proposed ordinance. I think it's really good. And the only other thing I had a question about has to do with CEQA. I saw in the findings, A, B, and C, that C says no CEQA finding needs to be made. That's amazing to me. And I'd like to be enlightened on that, because I've been familiar with CEQA since 1970s when it was enacted. So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the commission like
Why don't we take note of
table
I'd
that?
be happy
Okay.
to, I'd be happy to answer them afterwards, or if you want to answer.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Would you like the commission like him to answer it on sequel right now? Might as well. Go
Okay.
ahead, David.
I don't have my handbook in front of me, but
Yeah.
if you look at 15061B3, the determination of our council and ourselves is this act is not required to go through any further environmental review.
Okay.
I can elaborate more, but it's more along the legal terms, and that's the determinations made by us in legal counsel.
Okay.
It's in the staff report, 15061B3.
Okay. Thank you, David. Any more who would like to speak in favor? Okay. With that, I'll move on to those who would like to speak in opposition of the proposed new changes.
Is it possible to get this one of the slides up? Yeah. Which one you want? Yeah, the one that just shows the grid of the original.
The original?
Yeah, or either one, it's pretty much the same.
The one thing to note on when you do talk about slides and this is for everyone, make sure to stay at the microphone when you are talking.
Okay.
And then go over if you need to point so that everyone, including the audience online, can hear you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. T.Y. Atkins, Tuolumne. I'm sure you've been following the history of this and why it originally got to bringing everything down to 6 plants and pretty much indoor only. And that's because that's what the state has given a recommendation for. And as it exceeded that in the grows, the board requested that these issues be addressed because there was a pretty significant outcry from the public in neighborhoods especially regarding odor, safety, security, visibility, enforcement, environment, and quality of life. There was a petition signed by over 500 people saying they did not want outdoor grows in their neighborhoods. And my concern is, I don't know if in the original state recommendations that they were purposely being deceptive, or now we're trying to stretch the intent of what was intended. When you look at what is being shown as being permissible now as an indoor grow, in my mind, an indoor grow means you're growing it indoors, inside the house. But now with this greenhouse proposition, it's outdoors and it's visible. And I'm not sure if the setback piece has been discussed, does this mean that anyone who wants to have a greenhouse and grow their 6 plants indoors in a greenhouse outdoors can do that in any residential area in our county? I'm unclear on that. I'm confused about, we're calling it indoors, but it's right outside. And 6 plants are going to be there. And unless they do the setback thing, in any neighborhood, in any residential area in our county, and I would be opposed to that until that's clarified. It just opens up to all the issues that were discussed before, the security issue, safety, quality of life in the neighborhoods. So that's my main complaint for being against this. It's just confusing. You're saying it's indoors, but now you're calling it indoors, but it's really outdoors. So I appreciate your consideration of that particular piece. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Question, go ahead, Peter.
Can I ask a question, sir?
Sir?
Yes. Is your primary concern the setback, or your primary concern the fact that it's outside? Or both?
Well, one of the concerns is because it doesn't say anything about setbacks, lots in Tuolumne, for instance, 25 feet wide, they could have one. And every house in every neighborhood could have one.
Without a specific
If there's
setback?
setbacks and it's a 25-foot lot and you got to have 10 feet on each side, there wouldn't be room for it. So setbacks would address it, but the primary concern is that it's really outside, and they're calling it inside.
David,
Okay.
you had a, no?
Just
Okay.
point of order, want to make sure if you're going to allow questions that you do it equally and that
Right.
you keep on topic. It was fine.
Okay.
There's nothing wrong.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jeff Musio. Thank you for your time. First, I want to thank staff. I was the one that brought up the greenhouse, and they did an amazing job turning around that information in one day. I'm personally impressed. So thank you, guys. And the thing I guess I'm opposed to is the plant count numbers. One of you guys asked where the 6 plants came from. And originally where that came from is about 20 years ago. Proposition 15 said per patient, you're allowed 6 to 12 plants. 6 mature plants means flowering. 12 immature plants means still in vegetative state. As the state worked its way through this process, it's given the recommendation of 6 per person, but along the way here, we've lost that. And what we're actually looking in here, and in
Can
the
you come a
first
little
section,
closer to the mic?
I'm sorry, you
You're
guys, I'm
fine.
trying to point at
Yeah.
the same time. What we have here on the first tier there is the state minimum. You cannot go below that, and there is no compassion above what the state is allowing from there. So we've gone from a county that used to allow more plants that were more compassionate for the needs of people. That doesn't allow for plants that are vegetating, that are waiting to go into your next round. You can't keep the genetics that you've been working on for a long time with 6 plants, because then you can only flower them. You can't have a veg room and a flower room. So it really limitates and handcuffs everybody. So when that originally was done, that design was per patient, and now you have per household. And that is the state limit, the lowest. So like I say, that's actually less compassionate than when we were a year ago. And some of you guys mentioned that 12 was a good argument, and it is a good argument because someone like me, I live with my wife, both of us are patients. Under that, we'd be restricted to half the amount of a normal person. My household would only be half as valuable, or allowed to grow half the amount of plants as a person that lives in a single dwelling with only one person in the family. So those are the things that I'm opposed to. Some things I'd like to say about the greenhouse is we talked about this at the city level, and you talk about security. It is a little harder to get into a house, but guess what? I can get into your house with a rock, too. A lot of things about visibility. A lot of greenhouses, they're with opaque plastic, so you can't see inside of them. There's some greenhouses now that have 6-foot stem walls made of concrete, so you can't get into these things. They're more secure than houses. So when you're talking about that, there's a whole level of things that need to be considered. And me personally, as a personal example again, I would much rather have my grow an acre and a half away on my property, where my greenhouse is, where I do have my grow, than in my garage 15 feet from my daughter's bedroom. Thank you for your time.
Hi, my name's Jason Price. I've been a medical cannabis patient for 15 years now. been growing legally, following the rules, and I pretty much kind of have a caged greenhouse for, you know, to walk up and everything. You can still walk up. It's that big. You could walk up with a pair of bolt cutters. I call them a master key. You can get into anything with those. You can walk up to any front door and put your foot through it. So security is a problem. We had a house in Tahoe that I was with 4 other guys. We were growing in there. Our front door was kicked in and was robbed. So even a house is not secure. So security is an issue for this stuff, and it's one of the things that I worry about being a medical, because I depend on it. A regular doctor has described for my arthritis, I've had both legs broken in a motorcycle and car crashes, Vicodin. They recommend that I take 5 to 6 of those things a day. Could you imagine me walking around on Vicodin 5 to 6 times a day? I drive for a living. So that would take my job away. I also get migraine headaches from time to time. The pill that I have to take that's been prescribed for me for that takes me out for over 24 hours. I can take 1 puff of some medical marijuana, go sit down, lay down, and it's fine within 20 or 30 minutes.
Can you bring it back to the ordinance now?
Sure. This is the valuables that I have from being able to grow my 6 to 12 plants outside. I really like the idea of a greenhouse. It's something that I can get secured up and put up. The numbers, like I said, 6 to 12 plants. Like the other gentleman said, we've got some in veg at sometimes. I'm not going to, the ability to grow our own plants allows me to take care of my medical needs without being excessively charged by it. And by these ordinances and adding the restrictions and everything, it's going to make it, whichever way I end up going, it's going to make it extremely expensive. And on just another note, it feels like the poor are getting squeezed out in this issue. That if you don't have money in this county, you're not going to be able to grow your personal medical marijuana.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
What am I addressing? Greenhouses? I'll limit it to the greenhouse issue right for the moment. Read. Okay. If I'm growing out of doors and place a greenhouse over the grow, it is now within doors. The difference between within doors of a living structure, within doors of an accessory non-glazed structure, and within doors of a greenhouse is that the greenhouse may utilize natural light, avoiding the additional cost and environmental degradation of energy-intensive cultivation. Not to mention potential damage to structures not intended to house gardens. Compliance checks are easier on both cultivators and officers when there is no need to enter and inspect personal living structures. The penalty for breaking into a habitated structure is more severe because the increased possibility of bodily harm to occupants versus an unoccupied structure. I would rather a thief take my plants than someone's life. Can I address any of the other issues in the ordinance? Well, one regarding the non-conforming uses. If that is to be the case, and I can understand the rationale for that, then it seems, on the other hand, first come, first served regarding if there's a sensitive use that moves into an existing area, it seems that it would be incumbent upon the new arrival to make certain that everything would be okay, and then it could be allowed, as long as, but the person prior would have, would be there first. So, I mean, it seems like these two, it's either it should be one or the other, and cannot be both. A seemingly small but important distinction is that the state recognizes medicinal and recreational as two separate pathways. There's commercially, there's an adult license A and a medicinal license M. So I don't know that the county
Time's all
can
up. Thank you.
go against the state in that. Thank you.
Actually, I have one clarification for
Yes.
you. You were opposing greenhouses or opposing indoor grows? Just a quick summary. What were you opposing?
I'm not opposing. My statement is for greenhouses.
Okay. All right.
In any zone.
So you're in somewhat favor of the greenhouse part?
Yes.
Okay. Just making sure.
I'm
that's
opposing
where
the
you're at.
opposition to the greenhouse.
We're going to double negative thing again. See what you started, Dave?
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for all being here. And thank you for all of your hard work, David and Daniel and your staffs on this. What I'd like to talk about is, the reason I have an opposition to this ordinance is about zoning issues. And I want to call to your attention and ask if you've, I look on the GIS, the county, the supervisor's viewer, the map, and I want to use Quartz as an example because a community such as Quartz is 100 years old, and when you look at the lots in Quartz, okay, there are other communities around the county that are like that, but that's a great example. So as I'm looking here and I see R1 and AE37 with completely different conditions, yet you can look on the GIS viewer and find lots that have both of those zonings. So which of those zonings prevails? If it's an R1 and AE37, which zoning prevails, particularly since it might be sitting next to an RE2 and an RE5 and an R1. You've got this hodgepodge of zonings in a very compact area that's going to create a lot of dissonance. And by looking at this urgency ordinance and basing it on needing to pass something but not taking into consideration the differing zoning pattern within this very dense community, you're creating potentially some challenges to this urgency ordinance, and you're creating some unintended consequences of having people coming to you and saying, we want a variance on our zoning, we want to change the zoning, and then you start dragging this into the general planning process. So that's just my line of thinking here is, I'm sitting back here on my laptop while I'm listening to everybody speak, and I know how much hard work you've put into this, but when you simply look at, and I encourage you all to do this, look at Quartz, look at Stent, look at Tuolumne, look at several areas around here, and you'll see that the dissonance and the confusion of what this is going to cause with zoning is going to be the unintended consequence that I don't know that anyone in this room really wants. And I appreciate you listening to that. It's that's for the purposes of this evening. That is why I would be not in favor of you passing this urgency ordinance as written, simply because you're opening a huge can of worms with the way this is structured.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let's one table zoning and talk about it at the end once we hear all the public comments, because I'm sure that'll come up. When
Just to clarify, this is not the urgency ordinance you're
Right.
considering. The urgency ordinance is
already
done by
in
the
effect.
board. This is the consideration of the final ordinance that will be sent as a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors on the 6th.
Right. Okay. Okay. Any others who would like to speak in opposition?
Howdy, Kira Tucker, been at this a couple years. I have a question for staff. I'm a little tired. I cut up firewood all day today. I'm not seeing any square footage for these greenhouses. There's a sentence in here, this subsection does not apply to accessory structures meeting the definition of indoor in regards to the 50 square feet, which I agree is small. Like, it should just be 100 square feet. So I'm wondering how big can my greenhouse be? Because that isn't in here.
Thank you.
I also wanted to just put it out there that this whole harmonization project we've been working on for the last year has harmed patients, state level, local level. I'm not in favor of it. We did a survey last fall, and over 95% of people surveyed are medical patients in Tuolumne County. And of those people, over 60% are on R1, 2, and 3. I like the greenhouse idea. I think it needs some cleanup work. So I would feel better if that was in part of this new ordinance going forward, because as far as like trying to incentivize people to participate in any kind of registration program to fund enforcement, which is going to come in the coming months, those talks are slated on the timeline. If over 60% are banned from participating in the registration program, that's over 60% of the revenue potential through registration fees. And a big concern for folks, because they are medical patients and they don't want their names and addresses published in the newspaper, is to route this registration program through the health department, so it's a medical record. I just want to give you guys that thought, even though that's a little off topic, for future meetings. As far as security concerns and people getting into it, I know people are really concerned about the youth getting their hands on pot. I'm concerned about them getting their hands on alcohol and other drugs. But I did want to share one insight about the market. People refer to the black market as the market if you're in the industry. The market dictates the market. And right now, we're looking at wholesale prices of $500 a pound. And that's down from $1,500 a pound as it was 2 years ago. The other thing is that growers in this county who had operated under that very lenient ordinance can't just take their pounds down to the club and sell them anymore. So you have to be a licensed grower to make any money. So that is in the past.
Just one more time clarifying with you as well. You are in favor of greenhouses or opposed greenhouses?
In favor of greenhouses,
but specify.
I have that question
of size.
Cool.
Yeah,
thanks.
Thank you. Before you go,
Yeah, Jerry.
first off, I'd like for the Kira was part of the marijuana working group and put in.
You got to tuck in. Oh, I'm sorry. Kira was part of the marijuana working group and put in countless hours on this process, and I'd like to acknowledge the contribution that went on for Kira and our fellow members of that. When you talked about the, security, and the previous person talked about security measures around the greenhouse kind of things, I'm sure you've probably spent some time thinking and looking about that. Do you have any ideas about how one might be able to make that, something we could put into a regulation that would help us on that front?
Well, it seems like the compromise with the greenhouses is to allow folks on those smaller parcels to grow outside, even though it's an indoor definition. I know you guys are working really hard on that. That's a Rubik's Cube. Maybe it needs its own definition. Maybe, it's probably something they're already thinking about. But if you're requiring a 6-foot opaque fence, lockable for outdoor cultivation on those other larger parcels, I would imagine that would be applicable security structure around a greenhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're in, what's a postage stamp place? Phoenix Lake Estates. And you've got the room 6 feet to one side, 6 feet to the other, 15 feet to the back in your backyard to put a greenhouse of whatever square footage limit. And your backyard is already fenced, 6-foot dog-eared wood fence, and you've got side yard gates. Those are lockable doors. You can get locks. You put a padlock on it, put a key lock. I don't know. I just feel like we've tried to mold this thing to, right now, 3 different classifications. Dick, you mentioned the chicken solution. You get 1 chicken or 2 chickens or 5, depending on how big your parcel is. you inspired that 2 years ago. So tip of the hat to you. So with that has come some disconnect, and I know that it's a tough thing to be an advocate up here and be out for social justice and peacemaking, but inherent in the design of trying to create some flexibility, we are creating some classifications, and this is determined by potentially your income, your wealth, your land ownership. And I don't sleep easy on that, which is why I'm retiring from things like this. But it's something that we have to tackle. I think that trying to open it up to as many patients as possible and protecting them is super, super important. I really appreciate your consideration for trying to up the plant count. One last thought is I'd like you to look at just regulating by square footage and make it simpler for everyone. I know that he carries a measuring tape and a click wheel. And commercial is regulated by square footage. So just an idea.
Thank you. Those who want to speak in opposition?
Hello. I'm retired now, but I had a commercial flower farm in Tuolumne County for a number of years, so I'm really familiar with all kinds of plants. And I have I'm just here to talk about people who want to grow. Not that I'm in favor or not in favor, but as a commercial grower, I know that you can't really grow anything in 50 square feet. You open yourself up for disease, unhealthy conditions, and I'd really hate to see people who have a real medical need lose their whole crop because you've taken what needs plants, all plants, doesn't matter what kind, need air and circulation around them. You've boxed them into this 50 square feet. I think that is really unreasonable if you know anything about growing. Also, I can't understand why R10 was taken, R10 and R5 were taken out of the third tier. What's the difference between R10 and A10? They're still 10-acre plots. So right there, it's just that zoning thing that's really kind of confusing. And as you probably know, I probably have a very large piece of land because I had a commercial farm. But next door to me, they don't. And that's, it's going to be very confusing. I agree. So that's one thing to take a look at. And also, as a flower farmer, I always had my mature plants in the ground. I'm just going to go with zinnias because they were one that I grew and made a lot of money off of. I had my zinnias in the ground that were mature, but in my greenhouse, I had to keep them propagating, just like my sunflowers. So if you're going to limit to 6 plants, you really are hamstringing people who really have a medical need for their flower. The other side of me is that I am a medical person. I deal with a lot of people who come in and out of where I work who are always asking for narcotics, for opiates. No, I have never seen the difference between opiates and medical marijuana. They're both prescribed by doctors. I would like to have some discussions about the opiate use in this county more than the medical marijuana.
I think you'd have to talk to the Board of Supervisors.
The other issue is a permanent foundation on a greenhouse. As a grower, there's 2 different kinds of greenhouses. Ones with cement floors on them that you're talking about a permanent slab also are much different. They can harbor a lot of bacteria. They're not as healthy as a growing environment. I think that you should not even discuss the foundations of the greenhouses because some people like to have dirt underneath and to be able to grow in the ground. And so there are 2 different types of greenhouses.
Okay, thank you. Peter, you had a question?
I do. Hold on. You started off your discussion with 50 feet being too small. Do you have an idea of what would be adequate? I realize that you're not used to growing this particular
No,
plant.
but-
But I mean, if 50 feet's too small, it begs the question, what would be adequate?
I think that would be up for discussion with other people who do grow marijuana on indoors. I mean, I'm not familiar with that, but I do think that good air circulation, and it also, just, you would have to discuss it with them. Now, I did hear a discussion about if you cram them all in, they're smaller plants. Well, there again, the difference between outside and indoors is much different. And why are you penalizing somebody indoors growing their 6 plants and making them grow in this little space where outdoors, they're bigger? So there's some dichotomy there that you need to address also. It's just not fair. And I think that would be a discussion for your cannabis working group on increasing that size.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to try to keep this brief because I've been working all day and haven't had a chance to really organize my thoughts on this. My name is Tom Taylor, longtime local. I was born in Jamestown. I live in and own my childhood home. I just really want to hammer on you guys. We've been at this for a long time. We're all really tired. I appreciate you guys just listening to us all the time and working with us, but I feel like we're coming down to a point when you look at this. You're about to disenfranchise half this county. I can't afford to remodel my house, to completely redo the heating and air in order to grow plants indoors. I think you guys really lack an understanding of how truly expensive it is and how prohibitive it is for most people in a very low revenue, low income county like this to make these kinds of changes to their homes in order to provide medicine for themselves. I just really hope you guys can walk away from this remembering, the Planning Commission, the Board of Supervisors, you guys are here to serve all of us and not just the people who are scared. You're here to help people who are hurting, who are injured, who are sick, and are going to have no access to the medication if you go through with this. So I really hope you walk away considering that.
So
we have a question
is
for
a
you.
presumption then that you would like to see 6 for outdoor in the R1 through that first section? Is that what you're advocating?
Absolutely. I mean, at least some sort. I'm not
right,
the expert,
all right.
but
A
curious.
simple answer, yes,
But
no,
yes.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think we should all be able to grow.
Thank you.
I've spoken a number of times at a number of meetings. My husband is disabled with chronic Lyme. I am the daughter of a retired LAPD sergeant. We grow. He uses cannabis as his medicine. It is what got him out of bed after 8 years in bed. We grow outside. We live in a 1,000 square foot home. I cannot grow indoors. I'm one of the failed farmers. We planted 6 plants this year, 2 died. And I know Kira will probably blanch when I say out of those 4 plants, we got a grand total of 8 ounces. That's it, I know. Okay, sweetie, I will. I know, we're learning. My husband is a senior. My parents are seniors, and my mother is almost blind from glaucoma. You are disenfranchising seniors. They don't want to show up here. This whole thing is, all the stigma around it. I know 20 seniors that grow 2 plants a year outdoors. They could possibly manage a greenhouse, but maybe not. I'm confused now as to what is for and against, but the bottom line is I would like to see outdoor grows, limited basis, greenhouses would be doable, but strict indoor grows, no, we can't do it. And you'll make criminals out of a lot of people.
And you're talking on the
I don't know what I'm talking on anymore, quite frankly. I'd be perfectly honest, but, I just had to put my 2 cents in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Any others who'd like to speak in opposition?
I've been up here all my life as well. I don't know where all this stuff comes from about everybody hating people who are on medical cannabis. I have never heard one person who is against commercial growing or any of that stuff say that they were against using medicinal cannabis. It's beating a dead horse, all the time beating a dead horse. I think that I'm in favor of medical cannabis when it's used correctly. The problem is it's a misnomer because it doesn't exist. Because you can go online right now, and in 5 minutes I can have a medical cannabis card from a doctor that you talk to over the phone. Everybody, they say 95% of the people are going to be medical grow. Of course they are, because they're going to avoid taxes.
So bring it back to the ordinance.
Because you don't have to pay taxes on medical cannabis.
Yeah, but how about the ordinance?
What?
So
The
how about bring it
ordinance?
to the ordinance?
Okay. Okay, didn't bring her back to that. Anyway, okay. I don't think, I agree with the gentleman that said about the setbacks. We don't have setbacks here, and you do have greenhouses. A quarter or an eighth of an acre lot in Tuolumne can have a greenhouse right up against the neighbor's back window, legally. There is no way to really secure a greenhouse. There's no way to, it's very hard to keep it from putting fumes out all over the place. It's very hard to do any of the things that these people worked on to try to keep this in line. I know there's a lot of emotion behind it. And I don't think that it's that hard to get enough medical marijuana, because you can go online. I went online and I found 800 growing little tents that you can put up 3 by 5, 5 pound, they guarantee 6 plants, 5 pounds of dried bud a year. That's 16 joints a day. How much do you need for medical marijuana?
How
Okay?
about back to the ordinance?
That's, oh.
Excuse me. No, excuse me, let him talk.
Yeah, let me talk. So I don't see this. What I don't like is the greenhouses, because you're going from a house now to another structure outside, which they allowed. Now we're going to greenhouses, and you're just going right back to growing outside. That's all you're doing. The county does not want people to grow outside in small areas, period. We had 500 signatures in 2 days saying they didn't want that. And just because a few people want it, you're just going to cave into that, huh?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
If I may.
Yes.
I'd made a statement earlier, and I'm going to say this to the folks in this room. We have been very good to this point about being cordial. Please continue that for all of our sakes, as well as staff, all the sides. We can get through this, okay? Please. So I'm helping you, Cole, but
Thank you.
I've been through enough of these meetings where everybody gets a little emotional about it. This is business. And I know it's personal as well, but we can be professional about how we do it. So please remember that.
We're listening to everyone. Okay.
Okay, well, I almost lost my train of thought here. What are we here for? I would just like to say that in the state of California, we voted for recreational and medical marijuana use. And I would also like to add that in this county, we have opted for just the medical, which we are all going to deal with. But the fact of the matter is that I don't see any doctors in here, and I don't know how you guys can gauge how much medication that I need compared to this lady over here, compared to that man back there. There is no way that you guys know what my dosage for the day is the same as, I don't know what your diabetic medication dosage is the same as my husband's. Not everybody's the same, and I really think that we should give that some kind of thought process to the 12 plants, because we did go from we could, and then you're starving us, and we don't know what we're going to do. And about what Kara said about this has been a long time coming, and we would really appreciate it if you guys kept our medical needs in your minds, because you guys decided it's medical for us, give us our medication.
Excuse me? Excuse me, can I ask a question? So, you're in opposition or in favor of the 12?
I'm going to be with the rest of my people here. We're not sure what we're in opposition for or for. We would just like to have our medication. That's it. And we'd like for you guys to consider it in a reasonable way. I truly do understand that most of the people in this county, they don't have parcels of land. They don't have 10 acres like I do. There's people in Quail Hollow that are very sick, that are not going to be able to grow their medication. We're not talking about commercial, but we can't have that either, right? So I think that if you're going to pick and choose, please try to remember the poor people, not the people that that can afford the 40%.
Right.
Thank you.
Is that all the opposition? Okay. With that, I will close opposition. Yep, and going to go to neutral. Anyone who would like to speak neutrally?
Well, I don't have a dog in the fight exactly, but I would just like to ask a question, because in another setting, there was a discussion about medical could go up to 99 plants according to the state law. So now we've got 12 here, so I'm confused by that.
Is that, you're saying the state law for commercial or for medical?
For medical. If you have a medical recommendation, you could legally grow up to 99 plants.
Do you want to?
David, do you want to answer?
I'm happy to answer. I'm just waiting for you to.
Do you know the answer?
This is your meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. Stop your time. So a medical recommendation is something that a doctor gives.
Right.
The county can regulate the amount of plants that somebody grows by ordinance, which is what the board and this commission is getting ready to do. So it's not saying that they can't have those, but they cannot grow them within our jurisdiction if we pass these. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but what I got from the attorney was that because the California state law says you can grow up to 99, that your county ordinance would then be in violation of that state law.
Our attorneys have advised us that this will be legally defensible.
Local, okay.
So we've had that discussion, and the ordinance that's being proposed meets within the state laws what the new regulations have allowed us to do.
Okay.
Okay.
And then my second, I guess, issue would be, I remember when they were talking about greenhouses within the city, it was going to be a requirement for them to be opaque. So that was something that I think would be within your jurisdiction if we did that here.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Thank you. Any others who would like to speak neutrally? Okay. So we did have two people who spoke in favor. One is left. So we only have one person who spoke in favor. I forget who you are out there, but you are allowed to rebut anything that was said only in opposition, and that's only if you would want to. You don't have to. Only the things that people have spoken in opposition. All right. Oh, pass. All right. So with that, that means there's no sir rebuttal, so we are done with public comment. Thank you for everyone being cordial. We got through that. So now we'll have a lengthy debate, and we'll figure out what we need to do. It sounds like we have 3 action items specifically to address. There were a couple of other things that sounds like people are requesting or we could talk about. With that, I'll just open it up to the first one who wants to.
Mr. Chairman, would you do me a favor and officially close the public comment?
Public comment is now closed.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. I always forget when the gavel goes down or not.
Could we cover what the 3 things that you were looking for
That's
again?
a good idea.
I've got one of them. That's the what I call the grandfathering clause, that if you've already got a grow going outdoors and someone who is a sensitive moves in next door, you know, what happens?
Okay.
Okay, that's one.
Yeah, so that's one. The second, or I guess the first of them was the greenhouses.
Okay. Greenhouse
Whether you
itself.
want to call that indoor, and what kind of restrictions you want to place on that. Basically, what we were looking at was placing the regular indoor regulations on those, and also putting the regulations for a lockable fence and the sensitive use buffer. And also, we were looking at also pretty much having this, I mean, this would apply no matter what, but pretty much having the standard zoning setbacks, which for lots under an acre is 15 feet from the front and rear, 6 feet from the sides, and also the standard building permit requirements. So this one, our suggestion, we're suggesting something on this, and it's basically to take out the language that we proposed for allowing up to 12 plants within an accessory structure, because we think that's going to, unless it's on the A10, A20, AE37, because we think that's just going to create some confusion. And then another item we wanted to address was the contiguous square feet indoors. So currently it's 50 contiguous square feet. Do you want to modify that? And then basically we were recommending that we at least remove that limitation on accessory structures such as greenhouses.
Yeah,
So,
David?
there seems to be some discussions about greenhouse, so I've asked Doug to come up here for a reason. He's our building official. And I think what will help is we're discussing, I apologize for the interaction while somebody else is speaking, but what is allowed as an accessory structure. The house, there's a reason why we put some pictures up there. That definition, we would like you to have the discussion and give us a recommendation out of that. However, as we finalize this, we'll hear yours, and we're going to fine-tune this as this goes to. As long as you've heard it, discussed it, and give us your recommendation, we can craft that for the board for final consideration. As long as you've had a good discussion about it, you had that. So I'm going to allow and ask Doug to talk about accessory structures under the building code, what's allowed. I think that might help you. And then if you want to discuss the types of greenhouses, that's fine as well. There are all types of them. We just gave you a couple short, brief things, but there are commercial ones. There's residential types that are more secure. There's some that are obviously built with blocks or more like that somebody had said. But for the most part, what the board considered yesterday was to allow that type of structure outside and to allow folks to grow out there. If you keep that premise in mind, and we obviously need to work through some setbacks and discussions with them that we will include in there. Your views on that would be helpful as we go through and craft this. Again, we literally had hours, and we discussed this whole thing about cultivation and setbacks. However, the board did not give us direction, so we felt it best just to hear from you and make your recommendation to them. So that was deliberate, and the square footages, if you have a recommendation on the size of those, that's fine as well. Keep in mind, parcel sizes are very different in those categories. So if you say, all right, I'm going to be a little more cautious than that, 200 square feet, a 200 square foot 20 by 10, or any combination thereof, is very different sometimes than a small lot, 5,000 square foot lot versus a 20,000 square foot lot. Both can be zoned R1. So keep that in mind, and we will not solve here today or at any time the different lot sizes in any jurisdiction. It is not unique here. I will tell you that this is throughout our county. You're going to have variance. The older your county, the more varied your types of lots you're going to have. And that's just something you have to deal with on that when you buy your property, that you have to know that your neighbors are. And that's just how it is. And that's not different or unique here at all. So, sorry for going on this, but I just wanted to have those talking points for you. And if you'd allow, I'll ask Doug to talk about accessory structures.
If we could, because I think that the conversation is one we need to drive all the way down, and there's one subject that that you put up, and it didn't make it to our list, and I'd like to just kind of flesh it out, because I think a lot of the thought behind it maybe didn't get fully exposed in the conversation at this point, and that's the cutoff of the 4 parcels containing multiple dwelling units, that slide. The intent when that conversation came up was the idea of a commons, if you will, right? So you have, 10 people living in a condominium that have some big open space available to them, and the commons, so when we were having this conversation, how about instead of us having 10 little units stuck around there, there's one common place, and wouldn't it be nicer to have a common where some number of people could grow and I understand the enforcement issues, but I wanted to kind of flesh that out there a little bit, is that that there would be an advantage of having a common for this amongst a number of people that were all part of the same organization. They could do a better job of securing it, potentially. They could build a better facility than if you had 10 little hodgepodge sheds built up out there. And so that was the idea behind it. I think it still has merit. I understand the challenge of enforcing it and the desire to but before we just throw it aside, I thought I'd throw it out there, because it does really attack in this, smaller lots, smaller houses, smaller, a solution for some of the problems that were brought up by the things. I live in a small lot. Well, maybe if you got enough people together, you'd figure out a place where you could do this, and there'd be ability to do it. And by saying that we're not going to allow any of that, really does attack some of the problems that people, or leave open some of the problems people talked about in the public comment section. So I wanted to open it up for conversation.
Isn't there a medical recommendation for the co-op? You can, no?
That is not what is being considered.
Right.
It is your personal use on your parcel.
Okay.
And they were very clear on that.
Okay.
So we did not have large areas where people were saying, I'm growing here, somebody else is here, somebody else is here, and somebody else. That created a lot of confusion. So I think it's crystal clear why they have done that. That creates other challenges.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no clear answer on any of this.
I'm not suggesting I'm in
No, I know you're
favor
not.
again.
I'm
just
just
think that
giving him,
deserves
he
to
asked
be,
me about
to
co-op.
be argued
so.
out just a few minutes.
Understood why.
Go ahead, Peter.
But it's not really.
I guess for lack of anything else, try to tackle the square footage one, or a thought, or do we want to listen to Doug first?
Let's let Doug go. See what he
I'll
says. He might
back
answer
up.
some questions.
I can wait. I would.
David, isn't the square footage requirement deleted?
No, they're requesting that at this point.
Oh, I see.
Go ahead, Doug.
I'll wait.
Okay. Doug Oliver, Chief Building Official. To make it as quick as possible, because this was a lengthy discussion, but we had the opportunity to listen to the board talking to the the members of the community talk about what would work with greenhouses, and it occurred to me that there's a really simple way to do this, which has been mentioned. There's not a lot in this document. What are the rules? It occurred to me that the best way to open the door as wide as possible is to not put anything in this ordinance that was going to hamper it. As soon as we say you must have this, it becomes an item of contention. But if we give it over to the regulations that are already in place, it will resolve itself. And what I mean by that is we've made it clear that these are not greenhouses. Take the word greenhouse out of your mind, because greenhouse means something different to everyone.
Right.
Every person that says greenhouse has a different image in their head. Take that out. Call it an accessory structure. And then link it to the building code. It has to comply with the building code. It has to comply with setbacks. That opens the door as wide as possible to meet the safety requirements in the building code structurally, fire-wise, electrically. It blows it wide open and says, do what you want on your property to have a structure that meets these requirements. Because under accessory, you can have up to 3,000 square feet. Now that would make you panic because you think, how many plants can you fit in there? But not necessarily, because we have a number already established. So if they want more air for circulation, if they want to put electrical in there specifically for lighting, if they want to, you know, have a little extra room to put their mower in a few things and still have room to grow, you know, it opens the door quite a bit. And it also streamlines enforcement, because if we know the plant count per building, per dwelling, we can go 1, 2, 3, that's 18, 1, 2, 3, with 6 each, that's 18, or one that has 18. You know, it just simplifies things for everyone. The expectation is far better, and separating it into opaque versus translucent and transparent. They're all still accessory structures. They all still have to comply with code, and some of them, because of their size, can be exempt from permits, but still have to comply structurally and still have to meet setbacks. So if we separate this out, call it what it is. It's an accessory structure. Let's not give it scary names. And then make it clear that if there's opaque walls, no one's going to see what's in there. If there's translucent walls, let's put something reasonable in this ordinance to make sure it's not visible from the street and make it an attractive nuisance. So it really, in taking all this out and raising questions, we're actually putting it in the realm for more flexibility, opening the doors for more, you know, creative use of properties in a safe manner.
Question. You talk knowledgeably, I'm unknowledgeable of what the requirements are for an accessory structure. One woman talked about not wanting concrete slabs as
Right.
opposed to having natural ground or brought in dirt or whatever. Would anything in that definition prohibit that?
The current code allows several different foundation types, including engineered systems or even perimeters, or in some cases engineered or prefabricated structures you purchase at Lowe's. If it's a steel rail that is augured to the ground so that it resists
good enough,
wind,
yeah.
you can have a dirt floor. There's nothing saying you have to have a slab floor in an accessory structure. You can have a dirt floor
That
garage
answers the
now.
question. That answers the question. I just
Yeah.
didn't know what that meant.
No, but
you know,
it
in
really,
terms of-
it totally opens the door.
Okay, thank you.
I see that, thank you.
Currently, if forget the cannabis chapter of this, but if I just want to put a shed in my backyard, there's a size that.
Correct.
Some number of square feet that I can just go stick in there and not ask anybody or tell anybody whether I'm doing it. And then there's a size when can you refresh our memories as to what that size is and what the.
So that was discussed in this, and it was, if you have a accessory structure under 120 square feet with no utilities in it, no electrical, no plumbing, no mechanical, it's technically exempt from needing a building permit. It's still required to be structurally sound.
Okay.
It still has to meet setbacks, but you don't have to come and get a permit from me. You can build that.
Right.
And
You can't put a faucet in it.
no, well, you can come in and get a permit to put the faucet in there, and then, you know, but the structure is
All right, I just
technically
wanted to
exempt.
get that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
We make the distinction, and I liked your definition, call it accessory and don't put any limits on it because your setbacks are going to kind of define the size or limit the size anyway. Then why do we care how much room inside the house? If someone wants to, you know, change their dining room and living room over into it and live in the rest of it, that, you know, I don't care. So why do we care about that?
May I also, if you look, it also has to be maintained. The primary use of any structure, first off, it has to be occupied by the folks living in there. They can't convert the majority of a living unit to some other use. The primary use still has to remain that. Square footage beyond that, it's carried over from the previous ordinance. I said that about the 50 square feet. It's a good discussion. If you have a recommendation, we'd be happy to hear it. But what can't happen is you can't convert the majority of that home to some other use other than the primary dwelling. Then it becomes a use that is not a single-family dwelling.
Peter, can I bring it back real quick? So, first of all, do we need to make any motions on our decisions on language and on each individual one, or do we just literally say this is our recommendation?
If you'll just give us that recommendation,
Okay.
and we'll try to summarize it at the end here.
Perfect.
And this is your recommendation as a planning commission to the board, as we'll finalize and draft that ordinance for them on the 6th.
Okay, so I'm going to try to rein it in real quick so we don't flip-flop back all the different things that we have to go over. So let's stick on accessory. It sounds like we're not going to use the word greenhouses. We're going to use the accessory structure.
Good.
So let's talk about accessory structures and get that finalized.
A good idea.
So at this point, our language is right now we're talking about accessory structures, no limitations, because the enforcement code will define how big of a structure you can do. It would also limit on what you can do unless you come and get a building permit. Is there anything else that we want to talk about for accessory structures?
And it includes setbacks, so that,
Right.
that should.
Do we want to include if they are using, do we want to get a specific, if there's a translucent or a opaque, if there's a translucent building, do we want a fence that's opaque around it?
I think we have to back up and remember why we're doing this in the first place, and that is to create an environment that stuff can actually grow in.
Sure.
Right? And so if there is anything in our building code that makes it onerous for someone to create a greenhouse that is called an accessory structure, then we are, we're not getting to the end point we want to get to, right? So I don't know what that means, because I don't know the code well enough anymore for that part of it, and never needed to know that. But I think that there needs to be, you guys should take that on to say, okay, how do I make sure that in the process of this, we don't have some code requirement? It would seem to me that you want translucent because the whole idea is let light inside, so having it so it has to be completely opaque and made out of brick probably doesn't solve the problem. So if there is regulations that get in the way,
right.
And that's something you guys can take on.
So the board also struggled with this yesterday.
Right.
And that's how we came up with like this third category. And so we struggle from a standpoint of trying to meet all the mitigation. So let's talk about the mitigations, right? Security and visual, smell, and all those types of things. And so we struggled with, do we use the term greenhouse? Do we use the word accessory? Because our comfort levels from the building code and trying to make things safe and easy and it's definable, membrane structures, all those types of things that you guys aren't that familiar with. And then the other side of it is the simplistic from the public's point of view is, are we making this too restrictive when the board's wishes and your wishes may be to allow something simple and allow that use? So we're going to struggle with this, and I hear you, and the definition, if I'm summarizing what I'm hearing right, is allowing staff to make sure that, number one, your recommendation is to allow some type of structure outside, whether we term that as accessory or greenhouse, and to make it simplistic as possible for the public to understand, and also understanding the affordability of it and not make it overly restrictive. Is that accurate? And meeting the setbacks and still keeping the intent of allowing the light in?
Yes.
Is that?
I would say so.
Yes.
Is that summarized? I'm seeing a lot of heads.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Peter?
I'm particularly concerned about the affordability.
And that's why I said that.
I think
understand.
one of the gentlemen said so eloquently, this isn't something that he can afford.
Yeah.
So
that's a
the
lot
more we
to
can make it
absorb.
affordable and still meet all of the
Right.
requirements, I think
And-
that's.
And they're going to struggle with that. So we'll try to summarize that to the best of ability in language that works. And we'll have at least a week now, not quite, actually 5 days, to work this instead of one. So that's actually 5 times more than we had today, so I'm happy. Sorry, I'm trying to joke. So
We're expecting 5 times the quality.
you are just like some of my bosses, but I thank you. That's why I like you. If we summarize that as that's okay as part of your recommendation, because I believe,
I don't think so.
Mr. Chairman, that if we go through this way, it'll help us if we summarize this.
Cool.
And just make sure I'm dictating it back, so I make sure I've heard it, and we have it on record to make sure what we've been asked to make as your recommendation. Because I don't know how we're going to put this into a motion, but we'll figure it out. We'll take a minute afterwards to talk about that before I ask you to act.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's go to the since we're done on accessory structures or greenhouse, correct? We're all in agreement. So now let's go to that first page, because I think we do have to agree or disagree with Board of Supervisors in just discussing it and saying we agree or do not agree with the
Table.
adopted changes at the Board of Supervisors. Does anyone want to make any comment? Say yes, that we agree with what the Board of Supervisors did?
You're taking the table now, right?
Yeah, so that's the change of the RE5, RE10, and change it to 12 plants.
Very
We okay with that?
Not to muddy the water here, but, you know, I originally raised a question, why 12 instead of 6? And I heard basically the explanation of what the board's
But
thought
you didn't
was.
like it.
No, well, I don't know, is this justified? If 6 is the standard, and we can debate that endlessly, but there's big cannabis plants, and there's medium ones, and there's small ones, and the big ones produce more than the little ones and all that. So there's a lot of difference within the 6 or within the 12 as far as that goes. But if 6 is some kind of a standard for an individual person who needs it, and somewhere in here it tells how many cigarettes that would produce. I forget what the number is, but it seems substantial.
I think Jerry can answer your question somewhat on going through the working committee.
Well, I just wind it up and say, if that's the standard, then why are we doubling it? If there's only one person involved, it means there's a surplus. Aha. What's he do with a surplus? Yeah. So if that's a bad thing, then I think we ought to be aware of it right now. And so I still have a question about 12, whether 12 is right or 6. Thank you.
I guess
Jay, do you have an answer?
I want an answer. I have
Right.
I have an answer, not necessarily the answer.
Perfect. Close enough.
A number of things, and it's been brought up in the public comment here, but you know, there is no standard. First off, 6 is simply the most restrictive sets of rules that we can enforce. You know, that if you say how low can you make it, the answer is 6. You can't make it 5, you know, because the state said you can't make it 5. So the law says 6 or greater, and I don't know of any standard that gets you there. What was a standard for a period of time was the Medical Marijuana Act, and that existed, and you know, I'm sure there was abuses, but it existed, and it solved some needs, and so now we are saying we're not going to solve that need anymore. Inside of the Medical Marijuana Act, it was an individual thing, not a household thing. And so in situations where you have multiple users inside the same house, now you have a situation where, you know, the best solution for those people would be to separate and move in and live in 2 separate houses, so that they could therefore could do 12 plants, which I'm sure is necessarily what we want to have as our unintended consequence here. So I think there's a lot of things that support a larger number, and I'm not exactly sure why the larger number is tied to the size of property you happen to live in. You know, the person that lives on a 20-acre parcel isn't more likely to need extra medical marijuana any more likely than the person who lives on a 1-acre parcel. So, you know, I kind of would go the other direction. I'm back with you. Is if 6 is right for the 1-acre person, what's also right for the 20-acre person, because you know they're the same folks, right? So it's also wrong on both sides. There's not a I can't come up with any logic, but I do, you know, and I felt bad about this at the time when we made the decision. When we were, did we do this in the Opera Hall? And at the time, we walked out of that room saying, yes, we understand that the Medical Marijuana Act has been gutted as a result of this. And I personally felt that wasn't, you know, because I wasn't harmed by what the Medical Marijuana Act did. And so therefore, I didn't feel the need to go fix that problem. You know, on the adult recreational thing, you know, it's a different story. But on the Medical Marijuana Act, I felt uncomfortable with that, so. A position.
Well, I'm not going to hang this thing up on that. I'll roll to get this done, okay? Again, I question the logic of it and a few other things, but far be it from me to prolong. If the majority thinks 12 is right, I'll roll on it.
Majority? Peter?
Well, I guess I'm in the same position I was when we talked about this last time. I don't think 6 is reasonable. I just don't. Again, the compelling arguments that were made for the medical people last time convinced me that 6 was too restrictive. Using the opposite language, or the opposite logic to Dick, if 12 is okay for the larger parcels, why isn't it for the smaller parcels? I agree it should be the same. I don't think we should be picking and choosing. just because you have more property or you have a greater ability to buy a larger house or whatever. I don't think that should be a criterion. I just don't think that's fair. So
Would the
if I'm going to fall down anywhere, I'm probably going to fall on saying make it 12 for everybody.
would the size of a room and not only the size of your accessory unit also dictate how many you could actually grow, even if it was 12? Because some sizes of units wouldn't even be able to grow it. So.
Well, there's a lot of experts in the room who could probably answer that question.
So, I mean, I will tell you that we, all three of us, since you're asking staff, took a lot of time, and with help of some of the cannabis communities, going out and looking and assessing the types of plants, okay? Obviously, if you're going to grow larger plants, you need more space. That's just it's just logical. Whether you have a larger space does not dictate that you will grow those larger plants, or you have the ability, as somebody said, they were a pure farmer. You may not have that ability. So the number of plants is variable on the yield. I mean, by any standards. We saw them from pounds to ounces. I know you're struggling with the plant count, and you're going to continue, and so is the board.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is. So as far as the area that you're asking about, we tried to pick some areas that we thought, according to the size of the lots, where we heard the most complaints on. And that was driven by that. Those areas are not a scientific method. They are something that we thought that the setbacks from the property line and those allowable areas were something that were achievable. Yesterday, the board made some changes that they've asked us to present to you, and asked to move some of those R5 and R10s, RE10s up, and change the plant count. You're welcome. This is your recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. You may do whatever you wish with that, and they will make that final call, obviously. So I don't want you to feel hamstrung about what they did. I just want you to know what they did, and we're trying to give you a logical reason why we tried to make some of those balancing decisions, because there is no logical direct definition.
On when you did go out and you did look at the grows that people were doing, if you're going to do 6 plants, it seems to me 50 square feet is not going to be enough, unless you're growing very small plants. For someone who went to school in Humboldt County in the 70s, I have seen a couple of plants grow. It seems like that's not enough space.
I don't think we saw maybe one. I don't think she had 6 plants there, though. A small garden that had a small area like that. Most of them were larger.
Yeah, I'm just thinking 50 feet's probably not going to contain 6 large plants, just physically. And I don't know that. I don't know that
they would be extremely small.
Yeah, I don't know why we care.
To represent the other side in all of these meetings, there is, and they weren't particularly well represented here tonight, but there is an awful lot of people who had some pretty big horror stories about having plants close to them during the period of time when the skunk smell starts and the impact that has, and having to be inside. So, not being able to use their yards. So the just saying, well, we'll let outdoor go everywhere has a whole bunch of unintended consequences as well. So I'm more comfortable with having an increased number indoors.
Agreed.
And leaving the outdoors very limited. One of the things that we suggested that didn't make the light of day was to have some fairly large setbacks, so that at least if whatever was outdoors, the large setback stayed there. So if you did any in smaller lots, and that ended up self-regulating, because you go 75 feet back from the property line on most any place in these places, and you're down to 0. Right? So there's no place left to plant.
Agreed. And I'm pretty much right there where you are, Jerry. And I just don't see why we care what the square footage is. I think the setback is a better way to regulate.
Yeah, I think I'd just eliminate the square foot thing, as long as we got
I agree. Are you talking about indoors now or outdoors?
I don't really know
anywhere
that
in
matters
the world, if you grow these things, square foot has nothing to do with it. Number of plants does. How's that?
I agree.
I agree.
Yeah.
Chairman, sorry, may I approach?
It's closed for public.
It seems like she could.
That's your call, Mr.
What would you want her to do?
I would
What do you
recommend
think,
that-
Kara? Hold on one second.
I
What do you
would recommend
think?
that we get some guidance on this from Karen.
On which part? Can you
On
limit her?
specifically on the impact of square footage versus plant count.
Thank you. And try to limit to like 3 minutes.
This is exactly,
She's
this is not an opinion. This is not an opinion. This is how plants work. So if.
I'm going to say something here. Kira is in a difficult position and unique. And so, Mr. Chairman, I do agree with you asking some expertise because Kira has a lot of that value. Jerry and I experienced that on our working group before it was disbanded by the board. So I don't want the public to feel that the one person's getting an input. We're asking for facts, and I will make sure she sticks to that, I promise you, as well as trying to give you good information to make a recommendation.
And
so
facts
along
from
those
the-
lines, I am fine with this from an expert that staff does not have that expertise.
Right, but also facts from the fact that she was on that commission
And that's
that we did not all attend all the time.
That's correct.
She was a part
And
of it.
so I'm okay with that. So, but I will ask you to stick on subject.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm happy to help, always happy to help. And I know that David will keep me in check because I led him on some garden tours, and so he knows what I've seen, what I'm going to tell you now. In regards to plant count and square footage, there are many different growing methods. So if you don't have a limit of square footage and you have a limit of, say, 6 plants, I can grow a 20-foot plant. It yields a lot, more than I need. I'm really good at growing. If I have a square footage limit and no plant count specification, I can grow lots of little plants and probably end up with less than I would have if I grew a big, giant tree, right? So there's been discussion about, well, if we have a square footage limitation that is pretty small, especially if it's an indoors at 50 square feet, and you have a plant count limitation, you have 2 points at which you are being steered to grow in a certain way. So one method being you start your seeds in March and you grow big, loud, obnoxious smelling trees, or you start your seeds or take clones in, say, May, and you start them later. So your growing season is shorter for these smaller plants. So you could argue that the nuisance season is also shorter. Does that kind of help? So if you're looking for people's gardens outdoors to be out of sight and less obnoxious, I do feel that a larger number of smaller plants is a way to go versus a smaller number of plants, no limited size. That's when you have the plants towering over the fence and yielding a large amount, potentially upsetting not just one neighbor, but all of your neighbors.
Thank you.
Okay.
So,
Well, the square footage is only limiting on the indoor. I don't see anything in this that says limiting.
No,
on
if
the
you look in the table, Mr. Commissioner, you have square footage
Oh, I see.
limitations.
Sorry, I was
And
focusing
there,
on.
there
the-
was a reason for that,
Yeah.
is to
All
do
right, well,
just
those are
what
big
Kira
numbers.
said,
Yeah, those are big numbers, I'm not worried.
boxing them in.
Okay.
my personal opinion is Board of Supervisors, they've debated it just as many times as we have. I'm happy with what they've, probably more, and I'm happy what they've come up with. I would personally just go with what the Board of Supervisors recommended versus us adjusting plant counts and square footage counts on this specific table.
Cole, I will join you.
Okay. Are any other, are opposed to that? Otherwise, we can,
Well, I don't think we need to be unanimous.
No, we do not.
And I would say that I do not believe that the table, and, you know, John's gonna love me for this, and throw it back in his lap, but that the table hits a sweet spot between the needs of the non-cannabis community and the needs of the community. I don't think it solves either problem very well,
Right.
in terms of, in my humble opinion. And so, it's not that I believe that we should change it necessarily to this or that, but I think it's, at this point, is not accomplishing the end result that we want. I think we're going to end up with obnoxious grows that people are going to be complaining about, and we're trying to figure out how to deal with it, but we won't have a regulation to be able to apply towards it anymore. And so I don't think that we're there yet. So it's easy just to throw it back on somebody's lap, say, go fix it. And so therefore, I think that's what we should do. Is do the easy thing.
I love you, Jerry.
But I don't think it gets there. I mean, I just don't think it gets there.
Well, if this obnoxious odor affects the neighbors, doesn't that become a public nuisance? Isn't there something else in our huge amount of regulations?
We do not have an odor ordinance.
We don't have an odor
When you
ordinance.
talk about generally about public nuisance, that's a very tough, everybody's opinion about smell is different. I will give you personal experience. When I walked through some of the grows with them, they all smell different. One day I got a headache, one day I didn't. I don't know if that was just David, the wind, the grow, what it was. But so if you talk about a personal experience, you living next to it, your sense of what is a public nuisance and smell may be different than mine, and on a given day. So this is not an easy subject matter, and it's going to be sensitive. I will tell you that plant count, when we experienced that, mattered. Size was a bigger factor, especially when they were flowering, and we were very lucky to go look at them when they were flowering. There's a big difference.
Was that both indoors and outdoors, or just outdoors?
Yeah, we experienced, well, indoors to the fact that it was a very, very high quality greenhouse. So that's about as indoors. Outside smell was negligible. And that was during flowering season.
That's my experience. So.
Well, I'm of the mind to leave the count alone, but I agree with the 50 square feet indoors seems too restrictive. I'd go 100 foot, that 100 square feet, because that's a bedroom, and you might have a 3-bedroom house, and the whole object is to keep these things, keep the neighbors from having to deal with it and putting it inside. You want to incentivize to go inside, I would imagine. So the 50 foot seems to me too restrictive.
I agree.
I agree.
Okay.
I think we're all in consensus on that.
Are you, you got to win, Commissioner. Do you have a square footage you're recommending, or are you saying that there is no limitation? Which I would be, I will tell you personally from a building official standpoint, that would be concerning to us.
The problem, I think the distinction would be now is, are we talking about a limitation on the size of the accessory unit, or the limitation, I know, but inside the house, so how are we going to distinguish that?
Single-family dwelling, keeping the primary
Indoor,
use.
single-family, habitable structure, 100 square feet.
Right, which is a normal size bedroom.
I agree.
Okay, agreed. And then back to the table, we have 2 people that said they were fine with this front table. Is everyone, no?
I think we just can, we
Just
can
keep going.
We keep going with that, and then the fact that there's dissenting points of view, of course there's going to be dissenting
Right.
points of view.
Okay.
I don't need to convince everybody else that I just
Right.
want to have my,
Okay.
hopefully they'll read the minutes.
So you got what you need.
Hopefully they won't.
And they don't say, oh, that's just Jerry.
Exactly.
Would you give us a moment to let me think through how we would make this?
I think we need one more
Recommendation.
thing to
Go ahead.
talk about, though.
Go ahead.
I think, which is the striking of the parcels and the 12 plants, which is the final thing that you asked us to
Yes.
discuss. So once we go back one, right here, once we make our recommendation on this, I think then you can go back and
Just
make
give
your
me a minute
final.
to make sure. I want to make sure we do this properly, but how your recommendation,
Okay.
and I'm not sure how I'm going to do that yet.
I got another thing here.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well, I know, we're not at a recommendation point yet.
I think that's what he's saying.
I know, but we'll discuss more. He's wanting to talk about something.
Okay.
We'll discuss more on what we want to talk
Yeah,
about.
okay.
How many do you need?
We have 2 more at least.
Okay.
You need to make sure we get a discussion. I think the big one is the discussion about the grandfathering in.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's the.
That's some pretty deep.
That's the non-conforming issue.
Right here, number 3. On 4-20, 4 of 20.
Oh, you're on this page. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Laid them out for us.
So, Mr. Chairman, if you look at item number 10, bullet point 10 on, where it says moving forward, the issue remains about the sensitive uses and the discussion regarding non-conforming uses.
Can you see what page you're on?
It is
Page 3.
Page
Oh,
3
I'm on
of
this
the
thing now.
last item
Yep.
that we just handed out to you.
Got it.
And it's discussing about the non-conforming uses and how we treat those. So we're going to use the example, and that makes it simpler. I'm going to use my staff. We'll say Alex is growing someplace, and I buy the property next to him, and I'm going to put a church in, which is definition of a sensitive use. That grow is there legally complying with all the regulations, whatever's passed. And I purchased that property and put a sensitive use next to him. How does this commission want to make a recommendation to the board how we view that? And so we left you 3 options there. You talked about treating it as non-conforming use as we do all of the uses existing. They're existing, there's lots of different terms, existing non-conforming, just non-conforming, and that use would be allowed to exist as long as it doesn't terminate use for 18 months under normal planning and zoning laws. Or do we treat it somewhat differently and say you have 90 days or 180, whatever the days are, is a reasonable time frame to bring it into compliance. In other words, move it away to meet setbacks of 1,000 feet, or bring it into compliance by not having it. Treat it as a violation is the third one, and go through their code enforcement process, which would be noticing and notice to abate and notice of order. So just want you to think through those options like that, because it'd be nice to have a recommendation out of you.
Door number 1.
Peter, you have something?
Well, okay, I want to go one step further. Let's say it's a 5,000 square foot lot next to a larger parcel, which becomes the church. There's no way they're going to meet any setback, no matter how the setback is construed.
Correct.
Would this limit them from growing indoors as well? Because I think that's
No.
what, I think it would, because I thought you said the indoors still needed to meet the sensitive use.
Okay. The state law allows any single-family dwelling to grow those.
Okay, so we're only talking outdoor.
That'd be correct.
And greenhouses
as well.
Okay, but,
Accessory
so
structure.
that clarifies it.
The other alternative.
But I'm, whoever you pointed out's growing. Sorry, you're it. That person has a legitimate need, presumably, and right under the law, and all of a sudden, they're being forced to change because somebody bought a property next door. I got a problem with that. I got a real problem with that. I don't think that should be something that a totally innocent person next door who has no control over that particular transaction should have their situation change. Understanding that the church may very well not agree. So I have a question. One of the things that we do, and you folks mandate it, when someone buys a parcel next to somebody who's an agricultural use, they are notified that there's an agricultural use next door, so you can't say you didn't know. I don't know how you would do it, because people come and go, but if there was any way to notify somebody
We
that there
would
was...
not do that. That's a transaction to be handled by real estate.
Yeah.
We would not know when those are being
Well, I know there are communities who do, but
Well,
okay.
You
Yeah.
could, but I will tell
I'm
you
just,
that
I'm talking out
it
loud,
would
but...
be my strong
Well, given that...
recommendation not to have my
Well,
staff
given
do
that I knew that
because
was
you
gonna-
missed one, and then somebody's going to
Exactly.
say you didn't notify me.
Given that I know that's your answer, I think you have
You
to
can
go back.
argue with me,
I
I'm
think
fine
you
with
have to
that.
go back to saying that person did nothing wrong and their
I
situation
think you need to
changed.
get the lawyers involved on this one, our counsel involved, because I can't remember, I was just struggling to remember the name of the legal term, but there's something, the first word, the second word is condemnation.
Inverse.
Inverse condemnation, thank you. And
Inverse
so
or reverse condemnation.
Yeah, are we?
We had a long discussion about this today, so I'm
Okay,
not
so-
leading you into that. We've had a long
So
conversation,
at
giving
some-
you the opportunity.
At some point in time, a person owns a piece of property, and
they're
let's
legal.
assume at this point in time that they have a contract that they're negotiating with a daycare center. During the time they're negotiating that, we decide that the person next door gets to operate an outdoor cannabis farm, or cannabis grow. Now, they no longer can sell that to the daycare center. Did the county inverse condemnate, if that can be made into a verb, that piece of property? And, you know, now, anything from this point on, you'll have to pay my legal fees to be able to get my opinion on this. But, you know, so I don't know. I don't know that that's, at some point in time, the lawyers are going to have an opinion on this, and maybe they already have.
We're just giving you the opportunity to discuss
Yeah,
it,
I-
and obviously, we're going to take lots of time with the attorneys.
Yeah.
It's important for us to allow you to have that recommendation, and for the board, when we present that, to hear what this planning commission debated and made the recommendation, so.
I still
Any
say
one
that-
of those are,
I still say door number one.
Yeah.
Me too.
I personally, I don't want to
I agree.
say that someone's a criminal if they're doing it legally on that last violation, so.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't disagree. I just say we need to make sure we get our.
So it sounds like we're all in
Guess
agreement
the
for that
attorneys
first
will
one.
Weigh in.
Yeah.
Regardless of what we said.
So the attorneys will weigh in
We'll
on the
tell them
first
door
one.
number one.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Okay, what else do we need to talk about now that we've talked about so much?
And I think the last one was what you were getting
Yeah.
at with the,
Which is just to agree with you, or not,
Yeah.
correct?
We do agree with that.
I got one.
On this?
No.
No, let's stick to this first.
Oh, sorry,
Okay.
I didn't hear it.
So this
So-
is basically saying no commons.
Yeah.
If we use that, if you use my terminology, we're not allowing a commons solution because it's just too hard to.
that's how it's struck out.
Okay.
Just want your input on it.
Okay.
Any
Let's
comments?
talk to the enforcement guy. If
Oh, we
that-
had an hour conversation.
If that were
So
allowed.
You're lucky to.
If that were allowed, you have to make a tough call, it seems to me. You're gonna have to make a tough call anyway, but it seems like that makes it harder.
Actually, in my mind, it makes it easier.
Really? How so?
Striking it out makes it easier, or leaving
Striking
it
it out
like-
makes it easier.
No, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
If you left it alone, it was gonna be very difficult.
Yes.
By striking out, it makes your job much easier.
Yes, because I'm simply counting dwellings, counting plants, and making sure the plants are where they're supposed to be, and that takes a matter of seconds.
And I think it makes it easier for everybody involved, because
Oh, yes.
it's very easy to tell you either are or you're not.
Yes, there's no ambiguity
Okay.
at all.
Okay, so we're all in agreement with the strike?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead. As proposed. Thank you for that language. Dick, you got something?
Yeah, page 2, top, blue line. If you get a doctor to okay it, you can grow in excess of 6 plants. I think it's pretty much a given that you can get doctors, not in this county necessarily, but other places, to almost okay anything.
Well, even if they did get the a recommendation to grow more, they are restricted by the ordinance and by all the different restrictions we put on them.
Says here they can grow in excess of 6.
I don't see it that way.
That's how you get to the 12.
That's only for A10,
Yeah.
A20, and AE37,
That's
correct?
footnote 3.
Yeah.
That's what
the little 3
I
is
was
for.
wondering what that.
The reason why the footnote got put in.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that's
how you
got to
That's how you got.
Because
to-
otherwise,
Anything over 6.
because otherwise it's commercial.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
exactly.
But
Good.
that's differential now, that.
Those people get that, whereas the smaller parcels
Yeah.
don't. I'm just pointing out, regardless of how I feel about that, I think
I think
that's
the
what it's doing.
merits on, if we're disenfranchising, should be more of a Board of Supervisors decision. More
we
because
can
we're on the
recommend-
regulatory body, just helping them figure out the ordinance. And I agree with the disenfranchising and giving someone else a better opportunity or opportunity to make more if they really need it, but I'm not sure that that's our,
We could recommend if we want.
yeah. So is there anything else that we need to discuss for your needs.
I believe we have what we need as your consensus as a recommendation going forward. So if you, where's the staff report for recommendation? Here we go. So there's a couple findings you have to make with your recommendation. I would say that staff is asking to be allowed to summarize your recommendations that I've taken notes on as a recommendation from the Planning Commission. Summarize that's discussed here with the main points about accessory structures, allowing that discussion to make sure we had achievable way of somebody allowing that grow outside, where the definition is greenhouse or accessory structure. To recommend to the board that they consider the table and making sure they note that the commission as a whole does not agree and would not make a recommendation on the table as it is. That may not be the sweet spot. So to use Commissioner Baker's
well, I don't know
spot.
if that's, I don't know if you might want to say that at least a minority.
Yeah,
because
we will.
Because the representation here is that that's the committee at whole. I don't think that's where we were.
It was not. It was. Right. It's a discussion that the entire commission did not feel that board was the spot.
There was a minority.
Yep. And the 50 square foot of interior limitations would be increased to up to 100 square feet as a recommendation for inside of the primary residence for grows. That they would like the Board of Supervisors to take into consideration some of those smaller parcel sizes and the possibility of maybe the disenfranchising of those citizens, and they would make that decision as a whole. As it stands, the rest of the recommendations that were made in the item that was handed before the commission would be as written with the board's purview to make those adjustments. Have I summarized that adequately for us to be able to present that to the Board of Supervisors as your recommendation?
Any discussion on that?
Did it include the, what I call the grandfather clause?
Excuse me?
Door number one.
Door number one, I forgot that. And door number one, thank you for that addition. And door number one is a recommendation as the non-conforming uses to allow those existing non-conforming uses to allow, as per our normal ordinance code, is existing non-conforming in perpetuity.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike.
Okay. Thank you for adding that, Commissioner.
Good job.
I would also ask that the commission make the recommendations with the proposed ordinance and the recommendation that's consistent with the general plan. Proposed ordinance is in accordance with the Tuolumne County Ordinance Code, and the proposed ordinance is not subject to CEQA under the California Quality Environmental Act pursuant to Section 15061B3 of the state CEQA guidelines. So
I'll move on that.
If I summarize that adequately, then that would be appropriate.
So that's a motion and a second to approve of everything staff has just said. Okay.
No.
No. With that, I guess I will call all those in favor.
Aye.
All those opposed? So moved unanimously.
Okay.
And with that,
I
what do you want to
appreciate
say?
you guys' understanding, and putting this together at the last minute was a real task for our staff, and for the public to be here to hear and listen and comment on that. I definitely appreciate that understanding and work through that. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, David. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everyone, for coming. That was quite the discussion. We did a good job. Daniel, you're going to be missed. Send someone else.
Where in Sacramento are you going to, Daniel?
Oh, wait. I think with that, I'll close the meeting of today.
You don't want that public knowledge.
Yeah,
Where are you moving?